let's go to Russia. So obviously we can't take our eyes off of what is happening there. There is just a heartbreaking, catastrophic scene happening across the borders, crossing areas of Russia. Let's put this up there on the screen. U.S. News and World Report actually did a pretty good job of talking about this. Just the hundreds of thousands of draft-eligible men who are trying their best to just get the hell out of Dodge because they do not want to fight in this war in Ukraine. We talked previously about the hundreds and hundreds of cars at the Kazakh-Russo border, at the Russo-Georgian border, at the Russo-Finnish border. We are talking about lines that can stretch for 24 hours. And what's worse is that after the initial rush, as the backup continues, we're now getting pretty credible and good reports, Krystal, that Russian authorities are not only, I mean, everybody's grouped up, right? And they have everybody's identification. Well, they're going through and actually, in some cases, issuing draft orders to the people who are in line. They're like, oh, you thought you were going to leave? You're draft eligible, my friend. Go on and sign up. Yeah. It's just...
Well, you've got this massive consolidation of military-age men there for the picking. So, I mean, it's grotesque.
This would be like the equivalent of, in the 1970s when we had guys who were, going to Canada, like literally sitting at the Canadian border and be like, hey, mister, what's your name? Okay, well, congratulations.
Guess what?
You're going to Vietnam.
Canada. You're going to Vietnam.
Yeah, I can't. I mean, and imagine the turmoil that caused in our society and then ramp it up to this one. And let's put the next one up there. We actually have a little bit of numbers from the European Union. This is just the EU, to be clear. This does not include the former Soviet republics, which also share borders with Russia. 30% increase right now in the number of Russian citizens. Some 30,000 Russians have arrived in Finland alone. And the overall number seems to be between 300 to 500,000 people who have fled Russia in the last week. That is an astounding figure. Now, especially when you consider the vast majority of those are going to be draft-eligible men. So you really shouldn't compare it to the overall population.
Right.
You should compare it to the number of people, the percentage of the draft-eligible population. That's a hell of a lot of people to leave a country. And you got to consider what that means. I mean, if you leave, just like in the days of the Soviet Union, your family could face repercussions. You should consider your property may be gone. If you ever do come back, you could face social recriminations. I mean, there's all kinds of things that the government can and probably will do over there. Just to give you an idea, put this up there on the screen. This is so sad. This is a photo from the Russo-Finnish border, which shows a mobile draft board office right there waiting to conscript people who are trying to flee the country. So it just underscores like how much of a complete nightmare that this is. We also had showed you before how at first Putin actually acknowledged, he was like, hey, there have been some mistakes in the draft. We have some people who were disabled, some people who were too old. They shouldn't have been drafted in the first place. Well, the tune is starting to change in a very Orwellian 1984 fashion. Put this up there. The head of the draft office, this is from Max Sedan, he was the Financial Times correspondent in Moscow, translating it for us. The head of Russia's draft office in one of their regions says if anyone was drafted by mistake, it's their fault. And the reason why? Because the state cannot, especially at the lower levels, admit that Putin himself has made any mistake. So some of the stuff that's just coming out of here is horrific. We're talking about some intercepted messages that have been translated. It shows they told them we're going on a training exercise. A week later, they're standing in Ukraine. And they're like, oh my God, I'm in the middle of a war zone. And they're at a front line with like a couple of days later. Already, apparently, this one you don't know. The Ukrainians claim, I don't know if it's true, that they have found corpses who already have their mobilization orders on them, indicating that it took less than a week for them to get to the front line and are now dead. That's very Soviet-esque. I don't know if that is actually true. The photographic evidence hasn't been there. But it just, I mean, that's the bleeding edge of what reality could be in terms of what we're trying to parse. What we do know is hundreds of thousands of people have fled, and it's chaos, and that the Russian state is really cracking down on the people who are trying to leave.
Yeah, absolutely. And yes, there may be people who are saying, all right, I'm going to do my patriotic duty and join the military and get out there.
I'm sure those people exist.
I'm sure those people exist, but there is just no doubt at this point that there is a mass exodus of military-age Russian men who, listen, that also doesn't mean they didn't quote-unquote support this war, because I think that's important to understand too. There's a very, very different thing to say like, yeah, I support it, to I'm willing to actually risk my life or risk the life of my son for this purpose. Those are two very, very different questions. And I think that the distance between those two things is what you're seeing right now. You've had some updates in terms of countries that are saying they will take in Russian men who are trying to flee this draft, because a lot of the close by European countries had actually closed their borders to Russians. So some of them are reconsidering at this point. But we also had Karine Jean-Pierre yesterday saying the U.S. would welcome Russian men seeking asylum after fleeing Putin's military mobilization. She indicated that they would offer political asylum to men who are fleeing the draft. However, they didn't announce a specific program, so there's a lot of details that are lacking here in terms of how serious an effort this is to actually, help these dudes who are trying to flee and try to keep themselves alive and out of prison at this point. So we'll keep an eye on that, but it is a pretty extraordinary thing you're witnessing here. And I also wanted to add, there are actually fairly credible reports in the Russian press that they're considering that full mobilization in a couple months. So, I mean, that's part two of why you have such a mass reaction, because number one, they're seeing like already the draft notices are not only going to the people they said they would go to. So we don't trust you that I'm not going to end up with one of these things because we see how sloppily this is going to be handled. Number two, the mobilization order did not actually have the limitations that they're claiming, that they're saying they're going to stick to. And then you also have these rumors and some more credible reports that there's a consideration for a larger scale mobilization, a full mobilization in later this year or early next year, which is, it's a shocking thing to contemplate ultimately.
Yeah, I feel for these guys. I really can't imagine having to be put in that. Can you imagine being Russian from Siberia and they're like, yeah, you need to go fight and dine for the Eastern Donbass. Like, I'm getting the hell out of Dodge, just like all of them.
Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.